Shoftim v'shoterim. The beginning of the Parashat talks about the appointment of judges, ministers, people that the executive branch carry out the mission and enforce the rule of law of Torah. And one of the main topics that is in this week's Parashat is the idea of consulting with Da'at Torah. In almost everything you do in life, basically everything, a person has to consult with Da'at Torah, and certainly Koshikin with the Torah itself. And the expression that's used in this week's parasha is V'darashta, V'higidu lecha et devar mishpat. V'darashta means it's your job to investigate. Be proactive. Don't wait for the Rav and don't wait for the Rosh Yeshiva to call you. You have to run and figure it out. Ask, question. Lo habayshan lamed. A person will never learn if he says, no, the Rav is busy, the Rosh Yeshiva, he doesn't have time for me. He has to be proactive. It's his job. The Rosh Yeshiva is going to try his best to make the time, but it's upon the Talmid to make that effort and build that connection as much as is possible. That's the word V'darashta is the most important word. To seek and run after. What does Hashem want for me? And unfortunately, sometimes we live in a reality where people, I don't want to diagnose it like what is it? Is it laziness? Is it just apathy? It could be a number of things. But unfortunately, people jump to conclusions and essentially skip that step. They short circuit the step of actually asking. And it makes such a difference when a person jumps to conclusions. He sees something, he says, oh, it must be that this is what we're supposed to do. Without actually asking and consulting, it leads to what is a churban, a destruction. And there's an amazing story that Rav Yitzchak Weiss says over. Zecher Tzadik Livracha, in the name of this Maaseh happened with the Hazon Ish and a very prestigious Rosh Yeshiva that was Mekorav, that was very close with the Hazon Ish. There's a one time this Rosh Yeshiva came in to the office, to the study of the Hazon Ish, and he sees the Hazon Ish was not himself. He was a little bit unsettled, you could call it, perhaps even on borderline frustrated. He picked up on it because he knew the Hazon Ish well, and he was very familiar with his tones and everything. So he asked him, Kavod Arav, I see something is off. What's going on? Something's bothering the Rav. Hazon Ish didn't want to get into it. He pushed him off. Like he said, no, it's fine. Nothing, no problem. He says, Arav, I see there's something. Please, Arav, tell me, maybe I could be of help. So Hazon Ish says, I'll tell you. Bimit, something happened. It bothered me. So Shabbat, I decided, in Israel it's very common, they have a mirpeset. Mirpeset is a balcony. Almost every house has a mirpeset. A lot of them have it. You see, when they build the buildings today, the architecture is very smart in Israel. You don't see this as much as in America, but you don't really see that much balconies in America. But in Israel, a balcony is very important for really two reasons. One is fresh air, and they like building up, and it creates more space. But second is sukkah. When you have a balcony, that means you can build a sukkah. So many of the balconies, as they're designed in the architecture of Israel, is that they're designed to be like steps. And they maximize all the space possible that each person could at least build in some part of his balcony a sukkah that's kasher. So even if there's overlap, but you could build a big sukkah and then you have the women on one side and you have the men on the other side, at least some of the sukkah will be within the guidelines of being kasher. So it's amazing how they have such a chokhmah and awareness to build things this way so that religious people who care about sukkah, you could argue, well, whatever, just do it in the parking lot, just do it. No, but this allows them an additional luxury, additional convenience when it comes to fulfilling the mitzvah properly. The Hazon Ish, he had a mirpeset, he had a balcony, and on Shabbat, he learned, the weather was good, he would learn on the balcony. And he was sitting there, studying, delving in Torah. He was wearing a hat and a jacket. And all of a sudden, from Shamayim, a bird comes and soils his hat, right on his hat. And he was in a dilemma. He didn't know what to do. There's a Shabbat hat. To clean it, he can't clean it. To go with it as it is, it's not mechubad. He's going to go with a stained, soiled hat. To wear my weekday hat is also not proper. There's a Shabbat. I should wear a weekday hat on Shabbat. So I didn't know what to do. To not wear a hat bichlal, that's not kavod. Not for the tefillah, not for Shabbat. To go to the Beit HaKnesset, to go to Mincha without a hat. He wasn't sure. He debated what should he do. He came up with a chidush. Came up with a good idea. He says, you know what? I'm going to wear my talit of Shabbat to the Beit HaKnesset. And that way I'll have a talit, I'll put it on my head, it'll be mikavod, and that was his chidush, the chidush of the Chazon Ish. I can't wear my hat, I can't wear a weekday hat, okay, I'll wear a talit. He comes to the Beit HaKnesset, and sure enough, that week, a very major Talmid Chacham came to the Beit HaKnesset, not from Bnei Brak, not from a native of the city, someone from outside, from Yerushalayim or from Tzfat, somewhere else, comes. There's a big Talmid Chacham, and he sees that the Chazon Ish is wearing a talit during Mincha of Shabbat. As bemet, at first glance, he was astounded. Like, why is the Chazon Ish wearing a talit? It was kind of like a puzzle to him. He went home, and he wrote, and he searched, and he looked, and he did a iyun. He says, I got it. I had a whole ma'alach. He wrote a whole pilpul shir, a whole shiur, on why the Chazon Ish was wearing a talit in Mincha of Shabbat, and how he got to that chidush in halacha. And he publicized it, and he wrote at the end, and the Chazon Ish got word of it and saw it. He says, Alevai shezachiti lechaven leda'ato harama shel HaChazon Ish. It should only be, I pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that I should merit to be mechaven, to reach accurately, grasp correctly the wisdom of why the Chazon Ish did it. The Chazon Ish was so bothered. He says, I don't understand. He could have just asked me. I would have told him that the bird came and soiled the hat, and I would have told him why I wore a talit. It's not because of this whole pilpul and everything else and all these chidushim and sources. Not only was he not mechaven to da'at HaChazon Ish, the only thing he possibly maybe was mechaven to was the da'at of the bird. Perhaps that's the opinion of the bird, everything that he wrote is why the bird did what he did, but it certainly wasn't my da'at. And the Chazon Ish was very worked up about why come to conclusions, why get to a place where, well, if he did this, it must be that way. You can ask and find out and know exactly what the halacha is. V'darashta v'yigidu lecha, says the Torah. The same story happened also in Bnei Brak. I guess there's a big segula in Bnei Brak for this to happen. It was with Rabbi Leeor Dahan, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, Gedol Adorot, one of the great Gedolei Ador. One time, there was a Rav that came to him, and he was there Motzei Shabbat, and he saw that Rav Steinman didn't do Birkat Boreh Mineh Besamim on the Havdalah of Motzei Shabbat. He didn't do it. He did Boreh Pri HaGefen, Boreh Meoreh HaEsh, Yalla, Havdalah, Baruch HaMavdil, and drink the wine. There's a little bit of a pele be'inav, but he said, Shema Mina, you see from here that it's not required to do Boreh Mineh Besamim. As the Gemara says, En mechazerin achara besamim. The Gemara says you don't chase after besamim in the Havdalah. You don't have besamim accessible. You don't have to do it. So I see that Rav Steinman, he held, you don't need to do besamim in the actual Havdalah. Maybe he does it afterwards, but you don't need to do it. Shema Mina. There's the one time before he was able to publicize, the position of Rav Steinman, he went with Rav Silman, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, to the house of Rav Steinman, and he told Rav Silman, look, you'll see when Rav Steinman does Havdalah, he's not going to do it on the Besamim. Chidush, right? Rav Silman pays attention. Sure enough, Rav Steinman does the Havdalah, and he doesn't do on the Besamim. Rav Silman says, it's very interesting. I also don't do on the Besamim. You also don't do it. What is this? Am I living in a different world? He says, no, very simple. I'm not able to smell. My sense of smell has deteriorated so much that I can't smell. What's the point of saying bracha b'samim? You're not able to smell the b'samim. So maybe that's the reason that Rav Steinman also doesn't do b'samim. Perhaps his smell is very, very weak. As not today, after COVID, a lot of people lost their sense of smell for a significant time. Some people for years. Some people never got it back. And some people for a few weeks lost their sense of smell. But maybe that's why Rav Steinman doesn't say. Be'emet, they came over to Rav Steinman and they asked him, and he told them, yeah, I'm unable to smell. And it was revealed, they figured out that Rav Steinman, during the years of the Holocaust, he was living in Switzerland. He escaped to Switzerland and he lived there for all those years. And Switzerland, evidently, I didn't know this, they have a lot of avodah zarah and a lot of smells from the churches and from these places of avodah zarah that would permeate the streets, even if you weren't inside the church. And Rav Steinman was very worked up about the fact that he's smelling avodah zarah. He didn't want to smell avodah zarah. He prayed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he should take away his sense of smell. So he shouldn't have to, chas v'shalom, benefit an iota from avodah zarah. It's be'emet, things that are asur be'ana'ah, like avodah zarah is asur be'ana'ah, you're not even supposed to smell it and benefit from it. So he preferred, if you have no choice, you have no choice. He's walking down the street, he's not being mechaven. But if he has an option to not smell at all, he says, I prefer that option, to have to smell this vile smell of avodah zarah. And he prayed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this is being such a tzaddik, HaKadosh Baruch Hu heard his tefillah and took away a sense of smell. So for the rest of his life, he wasn't able to smell. And that's why he wasn't able to do birkat b'samim. And imagine somebody sees this, and they see Rav Steinman doesn't say borei minei b'samim, and doesn't ask, what's he going to assume? The eyes already jump to conclusions. And they say, oh, beseder, so must be. We just had something like that in the Bet HaKnesset also. We had such an incident. Many times in the past, I spoke a lot about the halacha, whether we go, what takes priority in terms of tzedakah. One of the things that we talk about is tzedek tirdof. What takes priority? The aniyim of Eretz Yisrael or the aniyim of Chutz La'aretz? So be'emet, if you look at the sources, Aniyeh Eretz Yisrael kodmin le'aniyeh Chutz La'aretz. The aniyim of Eretz Yisrael come before the poor people of Chutz La'aretz. Except I wrote, based on the Bach, the Shach, and the Birkei Yosef says the same thing, the Levush says the same thing. Major Achronim say all of that is talking about where it's Aniyeh Chutz La'aretz versus Aniyeh Eretz Yisrael, and they don't live in your city. You have poor people outside of Israel, poor people in Israel. Two people come from two different places. One's collecting for Israel, one's collecting for London. I don't know, just as an example. They say, who comes first? I have on me $100. Who should I give the $100 to? Give it to the Aniyeh Eretz Yisrael and not to the Aniyeh Chutz La'aretz. However, the poskim write, Aniyeh Irecha kodmin le'aniyeh Eretz Yisrael. When it comes to the poor people of your city versus the poor people of Eretz Yisrael, the poor people of your city come before the poor people of Eretz Yisrael. So it was a Rav that we allowed him in the Bet HaKnesset to speak, and he said the opposite. He said, no, Aniyeh Eretz Yisrael, everything that you make in Chutz La'aretz is for the Aniyeh Eretz Yisrael. You have no right to give to the Aniyim of your own city before Eretz Yisrael. You have to give first to Eretz Yisrael. And the people saw that I was silent. I didn't say anything. They derived, I heard afterwards, that Rav Babayev, he came over to me, is it true, Be'emet? Is that the psak? I told you, it's not the truth. Baruch Hashem, at least Rav Babayev had the sense to ask me if that's the halacha or not the halacha. I told him, of course it's not. I even wrote about it years ago. Someone asked me from a certain yeshiva, they asked me this question because there were people that they wanted to collect from. They wanted to collect from certain people, and the people pushed them off by saying, we already give to Eretz Yisrael. We give to Korelim over there, we're not going to give to your yeshiva. And he was saying back to them, but this is your own community. You're going to go ahead and give up your own community to give to Eretz Yisrael, but not give to your own community? And he was asking me, I told them to ask Rav Yisraeli, he's the chief rabbi, ask him. Bizmano az. But he asked Rav Yisraeli, and Rav Yisraeli said, tell Dahan to write about it. He'll write about it, and then I'll go ahead and I'll sign off on it. I was like, great, now I have to do it. So I had to look into it, and I did research about it. I told them, listen, Aniyeh Irecha Kodmin, you should tell them, that the first priority should be your city. And also, it doesn't mean you shouldn't give anything to Ani Eretz Yisrael. There's a big zchut to give to Eretz Yisrael. That set aside a certain amount for Ani Eretz Yisrael, but the primary responsibility is Aniye Irecha. This is something I said a few years ago, and I've said this in the past a few times, but a lot of people, because they saw that I was standing there and I wasn't saying anything, and I was letting the Rav speak, and evidently I was supposed to, get up and protest, like it says. Ovadia writes, very interesting halacha. He says that the Ben Ish Hai was known that in Iraq there were 4 times in the year that all the Batei Knesiyot would shut down because there was one shiur given to the whole entire city. 4 times in the year. This comes actually, this minhag in Baghdad is traced all the way back to the Gemara. We'd call it Yarche Kala or Shabbat Kala, had different terms, but these were 4 times in the year before Pesach, famously Shabbat Shuvah, very famous Shabbatot, that everybody would gather and listen to the drasha of the Chacham. So the way it would work is this was actually B'Yerusha. The Ben Ish Hai received it at his, first of all, he was the biggest Talmid Chacham of the city, but besides the fact that he was the biggest Talmid Chacham, he also inherited that right from his father, who inherited it from his father, from his grandfather. So the Ben Ish Hai, 4 times in the year, would have a drash. And in Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, he would always speak about the halachot that pertain to Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, Rosh Hashanah, Yom HaKippurim. And Ben Ish Hai says a very big chidush that's a little bit, you could call it breaking from the Mesorah. The Sfaradi Poskim follow generally before the Ben Ish Hai the ruling of Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch writes, if a person makes a mistake, it's going to be relevant very soon. If he makes a mistake and instead in Aseret Yemei Teshuvah of saying what he's supposed to say, HaMelech HaMishpat, he says, Melech oev tzedakah u'mishpat, like you do the rest of the year. Shulchan Aruch writes, it doesn't matter where he remembers, he has to go back. He can't continue in the tefillah without going back. He has to correct. HaMelech HaMishpat. The fact that he said, Melech oev tzedakah u'mishpat, no. HaMelech HaMishpat. It needs to be that way. Everybody agrees by HaMelech HaKadosh. The machloket is by the bracha Vashiva Shofetenu Kevarishona. That's where there's a machloket. The Ben Ish Hai writes, even though Maran says to do that, and the Hida writes to do that, and the Pri Hadash writes to do that, Matei Yehuda writes to do that, the major Sfaradi poskim before the Ben Ish Hai all said to do like the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Ben Ish Hai, that's very nice. Amrina and Saba neged Shulchan Aruch. We say Safek brachot le'akel, a question of brachot against the Shulchan Aruch, and therefore says the Ben Ish Hai, halacha is like the Ramah that says you don't go back. So in the drasha, the Ben Ish Hai said this in public. He said we don't follow the ruling of Shulchan Aruch on this. It says that there was the Av Bet Din of Baghdad got up in the middle of the shiur. He got up, he stood, Amad al Raglav, and said, his name was Rabbi Avraham Hillel, Zichet Tzadik Livracha, got up and said, Kavod Arav, this is not the minhag here. The minhag here is to go back. And Rav Ovadia brings this down in the name of Rabbi Ephraim HaKohen, who was one of the Mekubalim that heard directly the shiurim. He was one of the older Rabbanim of Yerushalayim that lived in Iraq and heard this ma'aseh directly. He was there, eyewitness to what happened. And he told this to Chacham Ovadia Yosef, that this is what transpired. To show you that sometimes we met the real Irakim, right? The real ones, they didn't hold back. They would go ahead and they would say things because to stand up for Torah. But in our generation, especially since in this case, the person who was speaking, he was speaking about the Ma'alav Tzedakah, you don't want to give a connotation of Chas v'Shalom weaken the idea of giving Tzedakah. So if this inspiring people to give Tzedakah, you shouldn't be stopping that. You should let them continue, let them speak, and let people be inspired, and let people give Tzedakah as a big mitzvah. You don't want to take away from that mitzvah. But at the end of the day, the truth still has to stand. What's the emet? It's not this way. Many people took from it, must be that this is the halacha, because nobody's saying anything. This is what the pasuk is telling us. V'darashta v'higidu lecha. You want to know, don't jump to conclusions. Don't say, mi deshatku le rabbanan shma muina odule. Just because they're silent doesn't mean that it's an agreement. And it reminds me of a story because now it's in the news, Uman, the Breslov, who would have thought that it would come down to this, right? The army versus Breslov. Is right now, all the people that have, in Israel, arrest warrants, the Talmidei Yeshiva that have arrest warrants, there's a big problem, because officially when you have an arrest warrant, so you're not allowed to leave the country, and you could be put to jail if you try to leave, because you're basically evading the military service. So a lot of people that live in Eretz Yisrael that are Breslov, they go to Uman on Rosh Hashanah. Now these single people that have to go to the army, and they have arrest warrants, if they go to the airport and they're saying we're flying to Uman, the Tzahal is going to take them and arrest them and put them in jail. So it's becoming a big issue right now. What are we going to do with all the people that are going to Uman? Are we going to arrest tens of thousands of people and put them in jails? There's not even a capacity to do that. I don't think there's any capacity to be able to do that. So this is like the latest thing. But many, many years ago, there was a Rav, one of the Breslov Rabbanim, very famous Rav, who was speaking in the presence of Rav Ovadia Yosef. And he was talking about how important and how amazing Uman is, and how big a mitzvah it is to go to Uman. And Ovadia is standing there. He's sitting next to him because he invited him to speak. He's going to speak about it. He says, I even spoke about it to Chacham Ovadia, and he encouraged people to go to Uman, said a whole thing. And they looked and they said, look, Ovadia is not saying anything. Shema mina mudeh. Must be that he agrees. Uman is such a big deal. And Chacham Ovadia heard that that's what people took from it. So the week after, he said, Anashim po choshevim shehazarti b'tshuva. People think today that I'm hozer b'tshuva. What do you think? I want you to go to Uman? A person is supposed to stay with his family. Uman is for the Hasidim of Breslov. If you're a student of Rabbi Nachman, you could go to Uman. If you're just a regular Sfaradi, you should be home. And he came out against it. But all those people that saw, you said, oh, Rav Ovadia, he had him there and he didn't say anything, he didn't protest. Go ask and find out. If you're not able to access Chacham Ovadia, ask his students to ask. Ask somebody to ask. Go find out. Don't just allow yourself to be convinced just because. A lot of times today, people go even further with this. They take a picture. They see a picture. This Rav was next to this Rav. And since he was next to one of the Gdolei Ador, Rav Yitzhak Yosef, Rav David Yosef, he was standing next to him. Oh, it must also be the same greatness. He must also be a Gaon Olam, and everything that he says now is Kadosh V'Tahor. This is a picture. What are you bringing from a picture? What kind of a proof is it? What kind of a proof it is? People have to ask. Ask the Rabbanim. Is this a person who's reliable? Is he reliable in halakha? Is this somebody I should follow? Is this somebody I should not follow? Let's just take a lesson. Even things like people watch, a lot of times they watch on these streamings, whether it's like very good, right? Torah Anytime, or they watch on YouTube various Rabbanim. And they hear various things from Rabbanim, even great Rabbanim, not bad Rabbanim, very good Rabbanim. They hear all these things. You have to ask the Rav, is this something I should do? Is this something I shouldn't do? Because you'll hear so many things. And some things are relevant to you, and some things might not be relevant. Even what you hear. I told you this story, right? I think I said this in the past. One time, just to show you that it has nothing to do with how great the Rav is. When I was living in Los Angeles as a little kid, I was probably 10 years old. They would bring, only the people that are 30 or older remember, cassettes. You remember the big cassettes, like this big? And you would have to put it into the cassette recorder, and then it would play. So every single week, they would record the previous week's shiur of the Lavyan of Rav Ovadia Yosef. Rav Ovadia would give a shiur every Motzei Shabbat. Now Rav Yitzchak Yosef gives it. That shiur would be recorded, and it would make its way to Los Angeles a week later. So every week, we would hear the week before, well, Rav Ovadia gave a shiur. They would put it on, they would play it on this tape, all right, a big screen television, the old ones with the big back, not like the flat screens they have today. They would put it on in the Bet HaKnesset, and everybody would come. Motzei Shabbat, that was the thing. There was a nice group of people every week listening to the shiur. So I wasn't such a tzaddik, I didn't go every week. But I did go often when I was a kid. And then when I went to yeshiva, it was still going on. When I was in my early years in yeshiva, they were still doing it. And I decided to go. I was probably maybe 18, 17, 18 at this time, maybe 19. I can't tell you exactly. I don't remember exactly. But I remember it was the early years of yeshiva, and I heard a shiur. So I was listening to the shiur. At that point in time, I already was more familiar with Rav Ovadia and his shitot and his ashkafot. I was not 10 years old anymore. So I knew his basic take on things pretty well. And he was giving a shiur, and he said, Rabotai, he was talking about Batei Knesiyot, and starting Shaharit of Shabbat, when you should start the tefillah. He says, a minyan should start 7 o'clock, no later 8 o'clock. If I see a Beit HaKnesset starting later than 8 o'clock, I think you should close the doors of the Beit HaKnesset. I'm listening to this, and I'm saying, this is not going to go over well right now. Not because of me. I know everybody next to me who's listening, this is going to become a war. And like as I predicted, I knew exactly who I was dealing with and who the people around me. It's in Hebrew, the word is pulmus. Pulmus is basically a campaign. This one line from a video that Rav Ovadia said became a campaign, where one guy decided he's going to go to every single Beit HaKnesset that starts past 8, and he's going to tell them, Rav Ovadia said your Beit HaKnesset should close down. And to like try to like basically everybody feel terrible about themselves, and like basically there wasn't Batei Knesiyot at that point in time that were starting before 8. So it's like, Rav Ovadia, hold your Beit HaKnesset closed down. Rav Ovadia, hold your Beit HaKnesset closed down. Just going around like on a rampage. And that Beit HaKnesset happened to start like, I think 8:15, and he was trying to convince them they have to start earlier, and even 8 o'clock sounded b'diava. They really should start at 7, not even 8. He kind of like, based on the tone that Rav Ovadia said, right? All these diukim. And I was like, that's not what Rav Ovadia meant. Because I listened, when you listen carefully, and you hear like the rest of what he said, what? You should come back home. The wife is hungry. The kids are hungry. Everybody's waiting for you. And you're like there like in pandi, which means like basically a king. You come in and prance in at 11:30, and in the meantime your whole family is starving. Now, he said that in a very short sentence. So nobody really that wasn't paying careful attention, it wasn't sensitive to who Rav Ovadia was. It was like Lav Dafka. He said close down the Beit HaKnesset. That's what we heard. That was the first thing he said. That was the first impression. I was like, he was saying, I was trying to explain to the guy, I felt bad. He's saying because people waiting for you at home, hungry. That's not the mitziut. The wives today, they wake up at 9:30, they're not even ready. When you come back at 10, they're like, what are you doing home? It's too early, you're pressuring me. Right? It's not shayach. He's talking about the Israeli culture. He's talking about Batei Knesiyot in Eretz Yisrael. It's a very different mentality. It's not what he's discussing. He's not discussing America, and Los Angeles especially, which half the place was Baalei Teshuvah. They weren't even that religious, like to go ahead and to start talking in terms of 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. Sure enough, after like a half year of a campaign, somebody got the sechel to actually call one of the students of Rav Ovadia. It was Rav Gidon ben Moshe. They called up Rav Gidon ben Moshe. They had access, and they said, this is what we heard Rav Ovadia say. Is it true? We should shut down the Batei Knesiyot? In Yeshivat Yehavedat, we have a minyan at 8:30. What are you even talking about? You guys lost your mind over there. He started giving him tochacha. Like, you guys are all crazy. And they said, Be'emet, it was such a beautiful lesson. Sometimes even what you hear from a Gedol Ado, from the leader of the generation, you have to know how to hear. And just because you heard a line, you heard what today it's called a soundbite. You heard a soundbite, don't make this your life mission. Ask, v'darashta v'yigidu lecha. Every situation, it can turn on a dime. It's one situation is completely different, especially with the Gedolei Ador. They're always talking about a specific instance, and it might sound to the average person that is talking globally. It's like a shita, but it's really talking about a specific case, and you don't know that because you don't have that kind of exposure. You don't know the mitziut. You don't have the context. You could get the wrong thing. A lot of times, just be careful. Just with videos, find out, ask. When a person asks, they end up knowing. I could say a lot of these stories, but I remember when the kosher switch came out. That was one of my favorite ones. Remember the kosher switch? Baruch Hashem, it went extinct. I was happy that it went extinct. I don't think it became popular, and it shouldn't have. Good thing. There was no point to it, because for the people that it was pikuach nefesh anyway, and they had to turn on, like in hospitals and things like that, you don't use grama. And for people that it wasn't pikuach nefesh, so it's asur. So what are you doing? Who are you saving? You're not saving anybody. So Mimela, it was one big charade. It was one big scheme, basically. The man meant well, and he had some people that, he tricked into agreeing, but Lema'aseh, the whole thing was not based in halakha, not based in reality. So good thing that it died. But I remember at the time, when I think it was Simcha Fazilov showed me the first time kosher switches. It was upstairs in the Kilat Avodat Hashem. The first time I was exposed to kosher switches. And I told him, look, this is not allowed. I'm going to write about it. Sure enough, I spoke about it, I think, that week in the Bet HaKnesset. I went through the whole sugya with the Rosh, Tosfot, what's a grama, what's not a grama, a whole discussion about it. And this is before Rabbi Belsky and many of the other Gdolei Israel came out straight up, railing against this. This is totally false. It's asur mideoraita. They came out very strong. But even before that, I was saying that this was asur. And some people were telling me, what do you mean? Rav Ovadia would have for sure held it was mutar. He was a kochad de'etera. Basically saying, Rav Ovadia holds everything is mutar. Anything that's a question in my mind is mutar. According to Rav Ovadia. I was like, that's not what Rav Ovadia held. And later on, it was revealed that in Chazon Ovadia Chelek Vav, he talked about the general concept of gadgets that work on the mechanism of grama, and he says all of these things are not to be relied upon. So Chelek Vav in Ilchot Shabbat, it's very clear what he would hold about kosher switch, even though he didn't directly talk about it, because they came up with a lot of these sort of systems. Either way, I spoke about it very strongly. This is asur, this is not the way, it's not the halacha. A week later, I get a phone call. I still don't know to this day how this happened. I get a phone call from, I think it was my father-in-law or my mother-in-law. One of them called me. We got word from my mother-in-law's parents. They're wishing me Mazal Tov. I was like, Mazal Tov for what? They wanted to wish you Mazal Tov because they heard that you invented this thing called the kosher switch. It's such a great invention that they were so proud that they wanted to wish you a Mazal Tov. Like, not only did I osir it, I most certainly did not invent it. I didn't even get there. I still don't know to this very day how I became the inventor of kosher switches after I gave a shiur railing against it. But what does that show you? When there's no v'darashta v'yigidu lecha, this is what happens. A person could say something is asur. It's almost every other day. A Rav gets misquoted every other day. It's like almost no, if you get quoted right, you're surprised. I'm shocked. Sometimes people quote me right. I'm like, I'm impressed. I didn't expect it. I was just already used to not being quoted right. So it's find out what the halacha is. One of the things that we say a lot, and a lot of times people are not aware of what it is. This is a fun fact a little bit. This goes to a story that happened in Israel. There was an MC that was invited many Gdolei Israel, great Rabbanim of the city, and also the political front, the mayor, the governor of the city in Israel. And he invited the chief rabbi of the city to come and to speak, and he said, Kivod Harav Peloni Shalita. And after the Rav spoke, he said beautiful words. He wanted to invite the governor of the city. So he said, Kvod Peloni, and he was struggling, like, what should I say? Like, Shlita, that's usually used Shlita only for Rabbanim. So the Rosh Ir said, Lama, tagid gam bishvili Shlita, ani gam רוצה Shlita. So he said, Pseder, yalla, Shlita. But the question is, if you think about it, first of all, what's Shlita? Every time we use this word, Harav Peloni Shalita. So it's a Rashi Tevot. The word Shalita, it's not really a word. It's an acronym with a few letters. Shin, Lamed, Yud, Tet, Aleph. Anybody know? What'd you say? Sheyichyeh leorech yamim tovim. Amen. Sheyichyeh leorech, Lamed, yamim tovim. Amen. Shlita. Basically, it's a bracha that he should live a long life. And if you look up the Hiskuni in this week's parasha, it's the basis for the usage of the word Shalita. Because he says over there, oh, Baruch haba. It's good to see you. You say Shechianu walking into the Bet HaKnesset. Zaku Baruch. The Hiskuni writes that a person who's a melech, you give a bracha to a melech, Yechi HaMelech. And we learn it from Shaul HaMelech, And we learn it from this week's parasha. Leman yarich yamim al mamlachto. This week's parasha talks about malchut, the kingship. It says leman yarich yamim al mamlachto. The concept of giving a bracha today in all of Western civilization, they say, long live the king. You should know that comes from the Torah. They got that from the Torah. Yechi HaMelech is a yesod in the Chizkuni based on this week's parasha and in the Nevi'im by Shaul HaMelech. We find. And you ask yourself, why is it that only a king gets a bracha of Yechi? Imagine a guy. He graduating, I don't know, became a plumber. He finished plumbing school, he got his license. Why wouldn't you congratulate him too? He doesn't need long life? Is the Gemara, we learned the Gemara in Masechet Kiddushin, we learned that, how do we know that women are also obligated in the mitzvah mezuzah? Where do we get that they should be obligated in mezuzah? So it says, Gavre bai hayeh v'nashe lo bai hayeh. Men need life. Leman yarichun yamecha. Right? Men need life and women don't need life. Why do you want to give a bracha to the melech, but what about the rest of the nation? They don't deserve a bracha for a long life? Elama, the pshat is as follows. It says, Usna et harabbanut. You read that in Mishnah in the Pirkei Avot. Usna et harabbanut means you're supposed to hate the... What is the rabbanut? Huh? Authority. Usna et harabbanut. The concept of rabbanut, the word rabbanut, it doesn't mean just a rav like we use it today. It means an authority. Run away from positions of authority. Why? Sheharabbanut mikaberet be'alea. Because the rabbanut buries its owners. Who do we learn this from? Yosef HaTzadik. Very good. It says that Yosef, who na'ag atzmo barabbanut, he wasn't a rav in the sense of the chief rabbi, right? What was he? He was the viceroy. He was the leader, Mishneh LaMelech. He was the second in command in Mitzrayim. So since he was nahag atzmo barabbanut, he took authority in Mitzrayim. It says that he died younger than the rest of his brothers. He lived only until 110. All the rest of his brothers lived on average to 120. Levi, who was the Talmid Chacham of the family, lived until 130, the longest. But Yosef lived the shortest out of all of them. Why? Because he was nahag atzmo barabbanut. Rabbanut mekaberet be'alea. Now there's explanations given. One is because of the kitug. There's a sort of ayin hara. A person who's in charge, people need him, and people are upset at him, and people have ta'anot, and people are jealous of him. So that causes a person to lose days. What's interesting though, is this is one of the things why Sfaradim don't like the word Rav. Historically speaking, Sfaradim avoided using the word Rav. Nobody wanted to be called a Rav. Today, everybody wants to be called a Rav, but back then, nobody wanted to be called. Why? Harabbanut mekaberet be'alea. If you want to use a title, use the word Chacham. Chacham, what does the pasuk say? Ve'achokma tehayeh be'alea. The Chokhmah, the wisdom, gives life. And the Gemara even tells us in Midrash Echa a story of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was confronted by Ben Batiyah, which was his nephew. He didn't have such great nephews, evidently. His nephew, Ben Batiyah, was one of the Biryonim, and he was the one to burn the storage houses of Yerushalayim that was supposed to sustain the entire city of Yerushalayim. For over 20 years, they would have been sustained. He burnt them all. And it was under siege. So they could have easily gone out of the siege. How do you think a whole entire army to support it 22 years just to surround the city? That's insane. Nobody would do that in their right mind. So they had enough to survive the siege. But they burnt everything. This Ben Batiyah v'chaverav, it just shows you that when you have greatness, it could go in two directions. You could have a Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, or you could have his nephew, which is the precise opposite. He could have been like Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. He chose a different path. You choose it, you fall all the way down. One mistake. It was devastated the entire Am Yisrael. As a result of that mistake, we lost Beit HaMikdash. And of course, Kadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated the events, but the person has a free will. And it was still their decision to make that mistake. And it was a devastating mistake that they made when they didn't want to listen to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. But either way, Ben Batiyah heard that when Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was informed of what he did, he said, Oi! And they told this to Ben Batiach, and he realized that oy meant that Rabban Yochanan wasn't on his side. If he's not on his side, he's going to lead a rebellion against us. He's basically treasonous against us, and he deserves to be killed. So the nephew wanted to kill the uncle. He calls in, luckily he did a little vidarashta, he called in Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Why did you say vai? Rabban Yochanan says, no, you misheard. I said wah. He said, you said vai. He said, no, I said va. Well, why would you say va? Va means happy, like wow. Vai means like oy vey, right? But va means happy, he's happy. Why would you be happy that they burnt the storage house? He says, no. The reason I was happy is because now we're going to have to fight. Before, nobody had the will. But now there's going to be a will to fight. Oh, bemet? Okay, fine. Let him live. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai walks out and said the statement, V'achokma tehayeh be'aleh. Baruch Hashem. The difference between va and vai, va and vai, a hey and a yud. That big difference, that whole thing is what saved his life. If it wasn't for that, he would have been killed. The wisdom that he had to convert it and to explain it properly is what saved him. So therefore, Sfaradim always loved the title Hacham. The ones that were worthy of it. The ones that weren't didn't want that title either because they were afraid of judgment from Shamayim. You're going to call me Hacham in Shamayim? They say, really? It's Hacham? How come he doesn't know anything? They say, what kind of a Hacham doesn't know? And then Shamayim, they're going to criticize him. So nobody wanted that title if they weren't worthy. But for the person who was worthy for that title, it was never Rav. It was always Hacham. We don't like Rav, we like Hacham. Either way, the idea of why we say, so it makes sense now, that Rav and Shalita always go together. You don't see Hacham and Shalita, you see Rav and Shalita. Why? The Rabbanut shortens a person's life. So you say, Harav so-and-so Shalita, Sheikhyeh le'orech yamim tovim, amen. Meaning that this Rav, even though generally it's mekabed be'aleh, we're giving a bracha that he should have a lengthy days. And this is why a king also, you give him a bracha, le'orech yamim, Yahya melech, because a king is the ultimate Rabbanut. It's the highest Rabbanut of the land. It's the highest authority. He can do as he wills. Melech poretz lo derech. He does as he wishes. En potzeh ve'en mitzaftzef. Nobody can criticize the king. The king can do whatever he wants. Therefore, Yehia melech. The king needs a special bracha to calibrate him with everybody else. And this is one of the reasons why Ashkenazim, you'll notice when a Gedol Hador walks in, what do they sing? Yamim. Yamim al yemei melech tosif. Why Yamim al yemei melech tosif? Add days. Say because of the Rav is again a position of authority. We want to give him a special bracha. Yamim al yemei melech tosif. They should have long days, even though that's melech, that's a king. But the Rav is also a position of Rabbanut, and therefore we give a special bracha. That's the idea of a Shalita, so that people will understand where it comes from. I'll tell you a chidush from the Hafetz Chaim that has to do with a king. Let me see the pasuk inside. It's easier to do it that way. There. Pasuk says, "Som tasim alecha melech, asher yivhar Adonai Elohecha bo, mikerev achecha tasim alecha melech." Torah gives us a command to appoint a king. The king has very clear responsibilities from mideoraita. From the Torah, he has to destroy Amalek. He is required, first the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, destroy Amalek, build Beit HaMikdash. Those are the three things that are the jobs of the king. Be'emet, Shaul HaMelech started with the job of defeating Amalek. David HaMelech essentially finished most of the job, whatever he was capable of finishing. He destroyed all the enemies of Am Yisrael, conquered vast territories, and created a landscape of peace for Shlomo, and Shlomo eventually built Beit HaMikdash. So a few of the steps by three kings, all of these mitzvot were basically performed pretty effectively. And those are the mitzvot of the king. But there's also negative commands that a king is not allowed, and listen to the words of the pasuk, Rak lo yarbe lo susim. He's not allowed to have a lot of horses. V'lo yashiv et ha'am Mitzrayma. And the Torah gives us a little bit of a reasoning here. He shouldn't return the nation to Egypt because Egypt had even from the times of Mitzrayim itself, from the times of Yetziat Mitzrayim, they had the best horses. They had the Teslas of the time over there. There's the Mustangs officially, I guess, is the horse. Leman harbot sus. So he shouldn't return the nation back to Egypt. Leman harbot sus. So that he can have an additional horse. Something's here doesn't make sense. You started off the pasuk, Rak lo yarbe lo susim. Shouldn't have many horses. Leman harbot sus. A singular horse. Why'd you change? Either stick with the yahid the whole way through, and say sus means plural, or say susim, but use both. Be consistent. Says the Hafetz Chaim, a beautiful yesod. In life in general, a person who's God-fearing, not particularly on the highest level, but God-fearing, and you tell him to violate a very serious issur for a small benefit. What are the chances he's going to violate a serious issur if he's somewhat God-fearing for a small benefit? I'll give you an example. You tell him, listen, I want you, you're a good friend of mine, I need you to do me a favor. Can you please drive to Rite Aid on Shabbat to get me a prescription? I'll pay you $5 for it. Which Yereh Shamayim in his right mind would listen to his friend and say, yeah, Habibi, it's Shabbat. You want me to halal Shabbat and drive a car and go to Rite Aid in order for you to get your prescription and you could pay me $5? For $5 I should give up my Shabbat? You lost your mind? No one would be halal Shabbat for such a minuscule benefit. But on the other hand, imagine the following scenario. Multi-million dollar deal. You could be making $10 million right now. This is a deal of a lifetime. You either sign the dotted line right now, and I don't care, do it with your right hand, with your left hand, scribble. You could just sign the dotted line and you can make $10 million. You don't have to work a day for the rest of your life. It just happens to be Shabbat. Oh, but it's already past the Shkia. There's been a Shmashot. All of a sudden, it's a challenge. Why? I'll just sign with my left. I'll do Bishinui. It's not such a big... Because the Isur is relatively, in the person's mind, small, and the reward is very big. So it's a much bigger temptation. There's a much stronger Yetzer Hara to say, Yalla, if I just do this one Hilul Shabbat for the rest of my life, I'm not going to have to pick up a key to work. I can just sit and learn and do well. So there's a much bigger challenge. Says the Chafetz Chaim, incredibly, when a person, and this is Kochot HaNefesh, we have to understand that this is how a human being works. There's no escaping how this works. When a person violates a small halacha for a big result, he'll end up violating a big halacha for a small result. So Hafetz Chaim says, there's a pshat in the pasuk here now, let's read it again. Rak lo yarbe lo susim. The king should not violate the halacha of having many horses. Now, why would he have many horses? Because there's a temptation. It's a good deal. Mitzrayim selling the best horses, those amazing, strong white ones. They're selling them really cheap, bulk. You have to buy 1,000. You could get 1,000 for a cheap price. Your whole army is going to be fully equipped. You're not going to have to worry about another war again. Oh, it's a big temptation. Okay, but they're selling in bulk. They're not going to sell me one or two. I have to buy a lot more than I need. Okay, beseder, but it's a good deal. Rak lo yarbe lo susim. Don't take the good deal. Why? V'lo yashiv et ha'am Mitzrayma. Because eventually what's going to happen, if you take the good deal, leman harbot sus, you'll end up getting the nation back to Egypt for a single sus. You're going to end up falling prey to a halacha for no benefit, because that's how the Yetzer Hara works. Once you broke the lines have been breached, it's over. It doesn't make any more difference if it's going to be big or small. Even for a tiny benefit, you're no longer going to care that much about the halacha. So it's important for us to understand how we have to fight the battles on that original front, on the things that are the most difficult and the hardest, and where there's sort of the most to be gained if we violate. That's where we have to fight hard. You can't say, no, whatever, I'll compromise on this. I'll win the war on the next front. I'll retreat and then I'll be able to pick up the sword, because then you won't be able to. Losing mentality. You're not going to win. You're not going to win after that. Leman harbot sus. You're going to end up returning just for one sus. You'll return to Mitzrayim and you'll violate the halacha. That's the kochot hanefesh. And this is how you have to be so careful and alert when we battle the Yetzer Hara. Okay, to be continued. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen. בחיים הקשה אומר עשה הקדוש ברוך הוא זכו לסיים מצוות שנאמר אדוני חפץ למען צדקו יגדיל תורה וידיר